sometime soon. All right, in 3, 2, 1. Shoshanna seeks revenge and Aldo wants his scalps, but nothing can beat Hans Landa's shouts. Everybody out there, we're gonna play that again because it's such a good song. But welcome, happy day, and welcome to you, Jeff, my wonderful co-host. How are you doing today?
Awesome. How are you, Kristen?
Doing great, especially after this movie that we got to watch these past 2 weeks, probably on repeat for me. Inglourious Basterds, 2009's one of its staple films, I would say. And if you were to summarize this film, would you give it a main character? Would you not? Because it's kind of like this amalgamation of, 3 to 5 different storylines?
Yeah, I read a really interesting review that talked about how it's basically the good, the bad, and the beautiful, right? That's really what's happening in this film, where the good is Brad Pitt's character, the bad is obviously Christoph Waltz's character, and then the beautiful is obviously the movie star, right? We've got this movie star character that lives in, but also the beautiful can relate to Shoshanna, right? Being the main character of that storyline. So it was a really cool review, and I thought that was a good way of describing it.
I think I like that. Have you seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly?
I have.
Yeah, right. So it all converges at the end there in the theater. So listeners, if you need a quick rundown, it starts with Shoshanna, a French Jew who's in hiding, and her family gets found out murdered by Hans Landa. She runs away. Cut to Aldo the Apache and his Inglourious Basterds, who are going to be sent into Nazi-occupied France to just kill Nazis and create havoc. Now, eventually, the plots combine because Shoshanna gets hold of a movie theater, and it's planned that all of the high command of the Nazis are going to be at this theater to watch Goebbels' new film, Nation's Pride. And so multiple plans come to fruition about killing all the Nazis and ending the war in 1944.
And, I mean, with the film, they do.
Yes, they absolutely do. And that hits on your first topic I see here. Alternate history is fun. Tell us some more about that.
Yeah, I think that this movie is just one of many films that takes what we know happened in history and kind of says, what if, right? What if something different happened? Where would the world be now? Now, this specific film doesn't go where the world would be now, but it gives the viewer of the movie the thought process of, what if this actually happened? What would the world be like after the war if in this movie theater the high command of the Axis powers basically are destroyed, right? I know a lot of people watch this movie and think that, this could have happened up until that moment, up until the moment in the movie theater where they're talking about, their plans actually succeed and Hitler is killed in the movie theater and all this stuff happens. So I think it's an interesting, really, really fun way of looking at history and kind of, reenacting it in a different way.
Totally. No, and I think they definitely really kind of played into that because Hitler, I saw as a very cartoonish character in the film itself, because the first time we see him, he's doing his 999, and then there's a big painting being painted of him. He's got this map of the places he's conquered behind him, but it's kind of like a game show map where there are the giant little swastikas over the map. It's not very detailed. And even Goebbels, I'm so bad at pronouncing his name. The filmmaker is kind of demeaned in that sense when he's met for the first time at that cafe. Cut to what he does with his translator and then cut back. Did you enjoy that? Did you think it was too much, not enough?
No, I enjoy it. I think I take it for what it is, and it's just a very, over-the-top film, obviously, in a lot of different ways. I think, to your point, though, talking about how they characterize these Axis power guys, they also do the same thing for the British High Command, right? Because Mike Myers is playing, this British High Command officer, and also Winston Churchill is there, just like smoking a cigar but not saying any words, or the only thing he says is brief them.
But that's a great point. And I mean, even I would even go so far as to say that Fassbender is doing a great job with one of the most stereotypical British men I've ever seen in a film.
Gosh, I think he is so good in that movie.
Yeah, oh, totally.
Like, so good.
Everyone in the film does a great job. But before we get into the performances, which I think is probably the crux of this film, we go back to the beginning. We have this scene. It's a French farmland, and a French farmer and his 3 daughters are being visited by the Nazis and being grilled about a family of Jews that are unaccounted for. And you right here, tension in high demand. And I think this, right at the start, Tarantino sets up a brilliant, brilliant scene with more tension than I could shake a stick at.
Absolutely. It goes on forever, it feels that, and I actually timed it. It's somewhere, around 10 minutes of this scene that's happening. And you're just thinking, as a viewer, you think you know what's going to happen, right? The whole time. And what you actually think is going to happen does happen in the end of this scene. But the entire time you're on the edge of your seat. It is a marvel to be able to do that for an audience to be, just so uncomfortable for so long during this scene. And the poor people, in the scene that are reacting, and, they have no power with what's about to happen and all of this. I mean, the first scene is just an example, though, of all the tension that's in this movie. It's insanity. Like the movie theater scene, the scene where, they're in the basement. All of these scenes are just fraught with tension. And it's like 2.5 hours of just not breathing.
You're just growing your hair gray at this point. And I like your point, Jeff. You said, you know what's going to happen. Was there ever a scene in this movie where you felt you didn't know what was going to happen at the end of it?
Yeah, I think, and tell me if you agree to this, the last scene. Like at the end, when you first watch the movie, you're not sure. I mean, you think you know, but you're wrong. I mean, I guess that answers your question better. Like, you think they're going to be able to escape, that this is going to be, like the way that history actually played out, but then it doesn't. They end up killing Hitler in the theater and stuff. And so that's the only one that I got wrong. But man, you think you know what's up, but you don't at the end.
Totally. And how did you feel the tension differed between the scenes where you knew what was going to happen versus the scenes where you didn't quite predict where it was going?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it plays into what we know. Well, that's not really an accurate statement either, because we know that Hitler didn't die in a movie theater at the hands of the Inglourious Basterds, right? But we do know all the horrible things that happened to people during the war. So we're expecting that those things will happen in this movie that's about the war, right? So I don't know. I guess I felt the same way, except for when it happened, I was blown away.
No, totally, right. And I feel like he does a good job mixing this, because we know the basement is not going to go well. I don't think there was anyone who saw that scene and went, you know what, I'm not going to trust what Aldo the Apache is saying right now, talking about the bleeping basement. That wasn't going to go well. And in the beginning scene too, you have to know that the family's going to get found out, because we have to set in motion the movie. But Von Hammersmark, for instance, what happens with her? It's a great balance, because there's the tension and it finally gets released the way you expect it to, and then there's the tension toward the end where it kind of feels like, oh, thank God it finally happened, and this is one of the coolest things ever.
Yeah, and I think that what attributes that feeling for a lot of people, including myself, is the fact that this movie jumps all over the place when it comes to timelines, right? And it's a, you know, it's a trope for Quentin Tarantino when you watch these films. Kill Bill is a really good example. Like you are never linear in that movie. You're really moving like, you know, 5 years ago to 10 years from the current period to back to where you were, back and forth, and putting it all together. I think this movie does a little bit of that, right? Because we see time spans that are in between these events that are really short, and then we see ones that are obviously really long, like between the first scene and the second. Also, you see all of the Inglourious Basterds like recruiting people, right? There's like a little montage. It's really well done, and again, it speaks to just keeping you on the edge of your seat the entire time.
Totally, totally. All right, so moving off of tension, we get to the big point of this film. The common theme: great performances can make a great film. You say still story, but still a great film because of the actors. And Carl the Llama tweeted at us, favorite part about this movie, 2 words: Christoph Waltz. And Carla continues, could you imagine it being successful without him? He is that movie for sure. I love it when the classically trained get big on the silver screen.
That is the most well said I think anybody can say it. I mean, Christoph Waltz was European TV star, and then all of a sudden Inglourious Basterds comes out and just bam. It's not only his performance, it's the plethora of culture that he has and imbues in this role, where he speaks like 6 languages in this movie, and each one of them sounds to me and like the untrained ear, which is the majority of people that are going to watch this movie, right? Authentic. He sounds just like he is putting on the same quality performance no matter what quote unquote role he's playing in this movie. It is a masterpiece performance, in my opinion. I think it is so good.
It is, and it was also the hardest one to cast. I mean, with all of the trivia out there, Hans Landa, if that role couldn't be cast, Tarantino basically wasn't going to do this film. And after seeing it, you can understand why. Everything rode on this character feeling real, not comedic, right? Because we talk about the higher powers on both Allies and Axis side being cartoonish, but Landa is real. He's a terror, but he's not without his humanity. And how do you think Christoph managed to balance that?
Oh, it had to be an insane amount of just effort on his part to be able to make that happen. And if it wasn't, I mean, he's even more talented than we're talking about right now. I think that to your point, it is the balance between Shoshanna not being a character performer or a character role in this film, and then Hans Landa not being a character role in this film, and them kind of being opposite of each other, because we have, you know, Aldo the Apache, we have, you know, all these other characters that are like portrayed as a character role in this movie. Even von Hammersmark in a way, she's like this quintessential movie star, like this type of thing. But you're right, he's real. He acts real. Up until the end, I think we really believe that he's not a character role.
Oh, that's a great point, right? Because at the end, he kind of is having fun. Where in the beginning, he's clearly not having fun. He's there for very serious purposes. But now that the war is ending, he kind of like that's a bingo. Like, he pulls it off so flawlessly. We believe that this Jew hunter, as he's known in the beginning, is just giddy, absolutely giddy, that he's gonna be able to walk away from all of this with his hands clean. And it's so crazy. But before we get into that, let's start out with some questions that I had with this character. I like the eatery scene. That's one of the ones where I think I had the biggest question, right? Because he's a detective, tried and true. At the end of the film, he talks about that. And he's in the eatery. He's sitting there with Shoshanna, though he probably doesn't know it's her. But at the same time, after ordering the dessert, he gets very, very serious and says he has a question to ask. But then he drops it and he laughs. What do you think, if anything, he was going to ask her?
I don't know. I think this character lives off of power, right? He just lives off of being terrifying and having other people be afraid of him. And he also is a really good judge of situations, right? Because we see it happen in the movie. He knows that there are people under the floorboards. He knows that these are not actually cameramen that are escorting von Hammersmark into the theater. Not that that takes a whole bunch of talent, but he knows all of these things, right? So whether he knows it's Shoshanna or not in that scene, which is another crazy intense scene where, you know, he's eating a strudel and he's like eating it and you're just the entire time you're on the edge of your seat. Take a shot every time I talk about the tension in this movie. But also, he can tell whether he knows it's her or not. He can tell that he's making her uncomfortable, and I think he gets off on that. And I think that he is just pushing the envelope, because I think if he knew it was her right then and there, something else would have happened, right? I mean, he wouldn't have chose the movie theater. He wouldn't have chose this whole thing. You know, he probably would have just reached over and, you know, maybe even murdered her right there in the spot. But I think he's getting off on the fact that he's making her uncomfortable, and that's building. And so he just is doing it for fun because he's just sadistic.
Oh, dude, I like that idea. But also, what if he knew and he chose to let it happen? Because, like he says at the end, 99.9% of the time you'd be right, but sometimes history just throws you a bone. So what if, you know? Because he lets Shoshanna run, so he knows. We can't imagine he's forgotten that a woman from a family he straight up murdered is still alive and still out there. Wouldn't potentially show herself again, though he never gets a close look at her face. So I don't know, do you like the idea that maybe he knew and let it happen? Or do you really like the idea that he doesn't quite know, but it's the power, and that's really fun?
I love the idea that we're able to even debate this. You know what I mean? I mean, that is so cool that, you know, there are moments like this in the movie that have that people have super different opinions about, and, you know, building up what's going on. I never even thought of that. I think that's a great idea. Like, what if this was all part of his master plan, right? And then you've got evidence that shows that it could be, because he lets the cameramen in to the movie theater. He lets all of this happen and he takes care of von Hammersmark, right? But he doesn't do much to stop the rest of what's going on. So, I mean, that's the great thing about this movie, is you just can come to a lot of your own conclusions, and it's cool to think about that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Now, talking about Bridget von Hammersmark, why does he strangle her, Jeff? Why? She wasn't gonna blow the cover of the plan.
I think I don't know. I mean, it would be a stretch for me to say. I think he felt intimidated by her because she's trying to get the best of him and almost did. And because it's such a stupid thing that she's trying to pull over his eyes, that maybe that makes him. I mean, I think he's truly evil, right? I mean, I think he really is in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways is he's super selfish. The fact that he is willing to give up everything that he has, quote unquote, believed in and stood by and fought for, just because he'll be able to get out of the situation in the end scot-free, I think is telling about this character. So if somebody's going to poke holes in that, if somebody's going to try to pull something over his head, he's got to establish his power. And why not kill somebody in his case he's just a messed up dude.
Dude, I totally agree. And I like that idea that his ego is so big that he can't possibly live with the fact that somebody, a dumb actress, almost got past him with a plan to take down the high command. He would have been completely out of control of the situation. And you're right, by killing her, he now puts himself back in control of what's happening. And now he's got the cards in all of his hand. I like that a lot. Now, what do you think of his transition about his moniker? I thought this was a really, really cool touch thrown in. So in the beginning, when he's talking with La Perdite, the French farmer, he talks about loving his moniker, the Jew hunter, because he earned that. And he loves that they call him that. Hard work pays off and all that. But however, in the end, when he's talking to Aldo the Apache, he talks about being a damn good detective, and he hates being called a Jew hunter.
Yeah, I think that, and we put like the time in between these scenes, and this, you wrote down here 1941 to 1944 is the time span of this change that he's feeling. Those were not easy years, right? I mean, especially if you were involved in this war, and we all know that it changed a lot of people and a lot of stuff happened. So maybe you can attribute that to his change of liking his moniker or not. But also, I think that maybe at the beginning he doesn't actually like it. He's just using it as a scare tactic to scare all of the people that are listening to what's happening, and to scare the living daylights out of this guy who, again, he can read and he can see this guy is hiding something from me. I know what's going on because I am a damn good detective. So I'm going to play into that and just scare the crap out of him.
Oh, totally. And it speaks to your belief that Londa's evil, because he threatens the farmer's daughters, all three of them. He promises the daughters won't be messed with by the troops. Maybe they'd been messed with already, right? And so he knows the importance. And that's how you kind of worm your way into getting somebody to give up non-blood relations, as it were. Sweet. So going to Aldo Raine, who I think is another awesome character in this film. I think Aldo Raine is this incredible opposite of Londa. And I think Aldo Raine may not be a good guy either. He's just on the Allies versus Londa being on the Axis powers. How do you think he got his scar?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's stories about it out there, talking about, and these are like fan fiction stuff, I think, when they talk about how he got his nickname and all of the stuff that he had done with the scalping and everything when he was, in the States. And things like that. I'm assuming that it came from something like that. But you wrote here, if I like that we don't know how he got the scar. And I actually do, for the same reasons that we've been talking about. It's like, in my mind, I can imagine how I think he got the scar. And I think that you can, anybody else that watches the movie, and man, that is one nasty, nasty scar.
It's so good, right? He almost got hung. We don't know where, when, or why he almost got hung, but the fact of the matter is, it's a clear enough character choice that it gives backstory without giving backstory. And I think maybe that's a big part of the reason why the characters are just so refreshing in this film, is because we don't know as much as a lot of films often tell us, because a lot of films can just open the book and start reading from it to give us every explanation for everything. But here we have these awesome characters that are great, and there's a little bit of hints sprinkled in the background.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's so cool to, and Brad Pitt obviously knows how that happened, and Quentin Tarantino might have a different idea of how that happened, and that's all just part of a good filmmaking, good character creation. I think it's like when you play Dungeons and Dragons, right? You're playing with your friends, things are happening to your party, and you have this backstory that your party might not ever know about, but it informs every decision that you make as you play the game. It's acting. It's basically the same types of things that are happening on both ends of this.
Right, and let's not pretend we don't understand actors, right? So for listeners, if you've never done acting, a big part of getting ready for your character is basically homework. background homework. A lot of the times playwrights will give you information either in a character write-up or in the script itself about the history of your character, and then from there you kind of pull from it to put together the story that you then use to fuel a character on screen. So that's pretty nice. And it makes me wonder too how in depth each actor in the film went with their character.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also, if you don't know a lot of directing, good directors will give you the skeleton of what you're working with and allow the actors to fill everything else in. So in a situation like this, Quentin Tarantino might have said, all right, Brad, you're going to be a guy that is on a squad in World War II, and the squad's going to get dropped behind enemy lines. It's your job to kill Nazis, and you, in the end, you're going to end up succeeding in stopping the war and all this, but you're going to have to do whatever it takes to make this happen. Go. And then, you know, the actors with the director's direction make the characters happen with the writers. I mean, this is a great example of how all that stuff comes together, and when it really does, it's great.
Mm-hmm. Now, jumping to a different question, artistic license and all that, do you have a theory as to why Inglourious Basterds is misspelled? Tarantino won't say, because I think he said something along the lines of, if I explain it once, I'm gonna have to explain it a billion times, so you know what? Have fun.
Gosh, that's totally a pompous director kind of comment, right? Like, I'm gonna call this whatever I want to call it, and then if you guys got questions, forget about it. I'm not gonna tell you anything about it. I'm sure there's some weird reason why it's spelled, you know. It kind of looks like it's just a harsher way of saying it, I guess, than if you spelled it the correct way. I don't know. I mean, there's a million fan theories I'm sure we could come up with on why, but I think that is telling, right? Of this person that's like, I'm gonna name it what I want, and I'm not gonna tell you why.
Oh, shoot. Oh, dude. So what if he spelled it incorrectly to hint to the audience that this was going to be alternative history? So maybe it's spelled that way in the alternative history that he has in the film.
Yeah, but if that's the reason, why didn't he just say it?
Who knows, man? Maybe he knows how crazy critics can get, right? I read Nabokov's Lolita, and Nabokov wrote an introduction that basically said, I wrote this because I felt like writing it. Here's like a single reason why I wrote it. That's it. That's all there is to it. And then there's this preface by some scholar who was invited to do, you know, a guest introduction to the book, who goes, don't listen to Nabokov. What he was truly trying to say was blah, 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 blah. So maybe Tarantino knows about this. It was like, yeah, just have fun with it.
That's great. I didn't know that. That's great. But that brings up a really good point, right? I mean, you open these books, you look at the forwards to films, and you look at all this stuff, and it's always, you know, to my beloved wife who this and that and the other. There's got to be somebody out there that's like, I wanted to do this just because, you know, it would be fun.
Yeah, right? And why is that such a bad answer? Right?
I don't know. I don't think it is. I mean, but we look at it like, this is for all of the fans out there that have been going along with the ride for so long and, you know, been up and down. No, I just wrote this because, you know, I was bored.
It sounded like a cool idea at the time, and I got drunk with my buddies. We popped out a rough draft, and boom, there we go. We found Hans Landa. Go time.
I mean, I would want to watch / listen / read that art more than I think other things, because I'd be like, wait a minute, these guys got drunk and just came up with this story? That sounds awesome.
I want to be drunk and at this story meeting just to watch it, right? Just to watch it. Okay, so jumping back to the story, this was something I thought was really, really cool, talking about Wanda being a real person, and Aldo the Apache, kind of cartoonish, but still kind of real. Like, he's like your grandpappy. If you grow up in the South, you probably have a granddad that acts like Aldo the Apache. So this kind of got me thinking about the film, and that Tarantino does a really good job, aside from the high command, putting together real characters in this situation. Like, for instance, the first time we see Aldo and his bastards take down the enemy command, when the one escapee is talking to Hitler about what happened, we have the German officer of the group of Germans that was captured come in on his knees, refuses to give away the location of his compatriots. And then the Bear Jew comes out and asks what the cross on the German officer's chest is and what he earned it for. You get it for killing Nazis, and the German replies, bravery. And then he gets beaten to death. But he wasn't going to betray his countrymen, regardless of what side you're on, right? He earned it for bravery, and he died being brave for his countrymen. So are there other things you see in the film like that? Do you enjoy the realistic both sides or people kind of a thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It shows like the whole, the whole fact that, this war was horrible no matter what side of it you were on. Some things were more than other things and all of this stuff, and it's just people in the end. I absolutely agree with what you're saying there. It's kind of that fact of, have you seen Band of Brothers?
Yes, we got about halfway through it.
So there's a scene in the first couple of episodes that you might remember where there is a German soldier and a U.S. paratrooper, and they're talking to each other, and the one guy says he's actually from Pennsylvania. The German soldier's from Pennsylvania, and the U.S. paratrooper says, what are you doing? Like, why? He's like, well, I had to answer the call of the fatherland, and my family moved back, and all of this stuff happened, and he's just another guy that is caught up in all this horrible stuff that's going on. I think that that is where it gets real. In some places this movie can do that. I think that there's a lot of humor, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the movie, a lot of crazy stuff that would never happen or never ever could happen, stuff like that, and obviously a ton of fiction. But there are a couple moments like that where there's some real stuff that goes on, and it just kind of grazes it.
Yeah, how heartbroken were you with Wilhelm and Maximilian? Were you hoping Wilhelm was going to be left alive?
Yeah, I mean that's another thing. Just pleading for his life because of that. I mean, that just shows these guys are on, I forget what it's called. They're on leave for the night. They get the night off to celebrate something, and then some crazy stuff goes down, right? And he's honest. That guy is honestly pleading to make this happen. He makes a decision which he thinks is going to be the right one, and then of course we get knocked right back into this crazy story when it goes wrong. But there are those moments there where you're looking at this guy and you can't help but feel like, this guy's just had a son, all this kind of stuff. Of course we don't know the whole backstory of what's going on, but his performance is super genuine at that moment that you believe him.
Yeah. Now, when so the truce was called in the basement, it looks like Wilhelm is gonna win. I don't think Aldo was gonna kill him. They might have carved the Nazi thing on his forehead and let him go, like they have been doing. Did what Hammersmark do then change your opinion of her as a character at all, or were you kind of relieved that she shot him?
That's the first time you see her, right? So I don't think you have a super idea of her character other than what you're seeing, and she's kind of acting as a spy, right? And so you kind of get that James Bond feeling in a way where, she's got a license to kill. So maybe this is an okay thing for her to do. And yeah, I mean, she just got shot. She just was in this giant thing. Maybe she doesn't want to deal with the possibility that she could get shot and killed again, or she doesn't know what these guys that are coming down the steps, she doesn't know them. She doesn't know what they look like, what they're going to do, if it's actually them. So she's probably terrified and picking one of the pieces of the equation out.
That's a good point. That's a very, very good point, because I wasn't really sure what to make of her shooting this guy whose wife just had a son. and he just had the hope that maybe he was going to get to meet his son, and it's just, oh, taken. But rewinding to the start of this bar scene, let's talk about Major Hellstrom and the whole conversation that happens. It's, again, extremely tense. Now, do you think Major Hellstrom knew from the beginning that the bastards were up to something? We get that finger explanation, right? The Germans use the 3, the Americans use the finger 3. But why was that the final straw? Why couldn't we argue that under the shadow of the mountain Pitzbaloo, they use the finger 3 instead of the German thumb 2 finger 3?
Again, it's a device to create this uneasy feeling in this entire scene. We just jump from one scene to the next that has this feeling, right? And the whole card game aspect of it, the fact that they're talking to each other and you can tell that he knows what's going on, maybe. I mean, I don't think he actually does. I think he probably has an idea, just like Hans Landa does in certain situations. Maybe he's a good detective too, but the character parts of this, like where he's drinking his beer out of a big Austrian boot, right, and like all this stuff that's going on, that's what makes it lighthearted enough to be able to watch it and not intense enough to where you don't want to watch it because you're so uncomfortable. I mean, it's stuff like that, talking about King Kong, talking about all this stuff. But to answer your question, I don't think he knew at the beginning. I think he could tell that something was up. And then what's interesting is this actor, the same actor that played that, is he a general or a captain?
I wrote down Major Hellstrom.
Oh, Major. So, a Major. The same person that plays that Major is in a film about World War II called Allied with Brad Pitt in it as well. And Brad Pitt is playing a undercover, stick with me here, undercover Canadian Air Force captain in World War II who is part of like this undercover operation to assassinate somebody in Africa, I think. So he's there and he goes to meet with this German captain, and the German captain is having this super uncomfortable conversation with him, and his cover, Brad Pitt's cover, is that he's a geologist or something, and the German captain says, yes, you can come to this party where your target's going to be, basically, but in order for you to come, I need you to prove to me that you're a geologist. Write down the formula for whatever element. And he like slides him a piece of paper, and there's an uncomfortable moment with the same actor that's doing the same type of thing, and that kind of plays into what we were talking about when you're, we were talking about this before. I'm sure if it was on the show or not, but when you're pigeonholed into a type of role that you're playing, it may be because you do it really well. And this guy in this scene plays this role of an intimidating person that possibly has information over you really well in both of these instances.
Oh, dude, right. That's hilarious. I guess when you start doing World War II movies, you're going to be doing World War II movies. It's kind of like there's this one guy, I don't know his name, but he's always in these ancient war movies. He was in Troy. He was Brad Pitt's right-hand man, not the blonde, but with the black hair. And then he was in 300, and he was Gerard Butler's right-hand man. So I think you're right. You really kind of take on this persona that nobody else can do better than you. So when they need a stressful Nazi Allied scene, you got this guy. You got Hellstrom, and it's so great. So bringing it back to this, did you enjoy Fassbender's character choice in this? And not that he was a bad actor, more that I feel he played the pompous card real hard, because it's a D&D group. They're getting together. It's a really tense situation. You have the player with all of the charisma trying to keep it cool, but then the barbarian just can't take it anymore. Although, would we say the other guy's the barbarian?
No, I think you're right. Fassbender is that person that's just going crazy, where he tells the captain to not sit at the table, or the major rather, to not sit at the table, right? Because he's doing this thing, and you could just see the other guys like Hugo across the tables just ready to rumble, and they're just expecting the worst after that part. This is a bit of a controversy, I think, but I love Michael Fassbender in this movie. I think and it's not just him, it's his dialogue, like the actual words that he's saying is great. The fact that right before he dies, right, he says there's a special place in hell for people that waste good scotch. And the fact that he says, his other great line is right before he dies again, he says, well, if I'm going to go out, I might as well go out speaking the King's. Right? I mean, he delivers it really well, and that's just a personal thing. I like him in this movie. But yeah.
No, totally. It's such a great moment. And his accent is so great. It's so British. Would you say he's got your favorite accent in the film? Because everyone's sporting accents in this film. I mean, who would be your favorite?
Oh, no, I think Aldo is my favorite, even though it goes into that whole caricature thing, right? Where, Christoph Waltz, when he's speaking in this movie, he's speaking with an actual, at least in my, again, untrained ear, he sounds like a native to these places, where Aldo sounds like a stereotype of what we think this person would sound like. Michael Fassbender's character sounds like a stereotype of what we think this person will be. So my personal favorite is Aldo, because I get a kick out of that. I think it's funny. Michael Fassbender is good too, but the best accents in the movie, like we both said before, I think are Christoph Waltz. He's just killer.
Oh, dude, and great point about the stereotype accents, right? Because everyone else is kind of chill and doing their thing, but you're absolutely right. That is a stereotypical high British accent, and that is a stereotypical a dumb Southern man with one purpose and one purpose only would say, and I love it. Oh, okay, so I'm now gonna bring it to a side character that I really, really love, Friedrich Zoller. I love this character because in the beginning, he's kind of innocent. He's just a German soldier, right? He's a person existing in a place he might not have had a choice in. And he's got a crush on Shoshanna, though he doesn't know her history. He's just a film lover, so we think. We find out over the course of the film that he was holed up in a sniper tower for 3 days and managed to survive. He killed, close to 200 people around there, I think, when we add up the count he gives us. And then at the end, we see him kind of break in the theater when he's watching the film made about him. And when he goes up to the projection room, it's still very lighthearted, and he's still very flirty with Shoshanna in a very innocent way. But suddenly it really changes, and it's very much do you not understand what I went through? And you're still gonna laugh in my face? That's messed up. I mean, what did you think? Because that part in the projection room really kind of took me by surprise. Did that take you by surprise? What are your thoughts about it?
It did. I think the same thing that you were saying. He's got a really interesting character arc in this movie, and a really interesting side character where, you're paying attention because he's directly related to what's going on, but not a main character in what's happening. I mean, it's a driving point of the story, and I think without that confrontation, the end of the film would have felt a lot different, right? I mean, if she was ready and willing the entire time, that would have been something different. Ready and willing with him, rather. And then if she was to not have that interaction right before the film ends and the theater burns down and all of that stuff, that would have been a different film. So I think I like the way that it played out. I do like that whole lovers quarrel in a way where he is quarreling with her, but her true love is what's about to happen in this theater. And not to mention, do we think that she is actually in love with what's his name? Michelle, is that his name? I forget his name. The guy that helps her get this whole thing done.
That's a wonderful point of discussion because I like that you said her true love is what she's about to do in the theater. And
Yeah, so she's ready to sacrifice whatever it takes to make it happen. He's ready to sacrifice whatever it takes to be with her in that moment, and then she kind of craps all over it.
yeah, it's weird. And I I have to agree that she loves him probably because they share secrets, right? Because he calls her Shoshanna. So he knows the story, her lover in the theater. But could you kill your lover? Could you personally do that, Jeff? Like, I mean, is there something in your life more important than killing your wife?
You
Or
mean,
less important than killing your wife? I worded that incorrectly. Oh dear.
no. So I mean that really shows how passionate she is about this. I mean, obviously she lived in this place where her entire family was completely murdered. So I think that's where they're going with this, obviously. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, very, very, very intense. All right, and then a final point of discussion I thought would be cool is what are your thoughts on the language jumping? I mean, Tarantino went whole hog into this. The French are speaking French right at the start. They only switched to English because Londa assumes the French Jews beneath the floorboard can't speak English, and he's correct. You know, his detectiveship is very good. And then all the German they speak. Goebbels even gets upset when people are speaking French and he can't understand it. So he throws a little fit about it. So did you enjoy all of the language hopping?
Oh yeah, because it's well done, right? I mean, and because they even play on the fact when they're doing the whole entry to the theater scene where, Christoph Waltz is clearly aware that these guys are American and they don't speak Italian, right? I mean, they play on the fact that language is such a big part of what's happening in this movie. The language barriers are big, the different types of language and the way that they're used in this movie. So I thought it's great. What did you think?
Oh, I loved it. And I mean, you're right. He uses it to great effect because he doesn't have subtitles on all the time. And he makes a great assumption that most Americans seeing the film won't be able to understand what's being said without the subtitles there. So when Zoller sees Shoshana reading a book in the cafe, they speak French and we have subtitles for it. But then when the Germans come in and start speaking with Zoller, we don't see subtitles for that. We're put in Shoshana's position where we can only kind of infer based on body language and emotional response.
Yeah, what a great point, Kristen. I hadn't even noticed or thought about that, but I mean, yeah, really well said. That's great.
Awesome, awesome. So if you like this film, there's a lot of stuff out there, right? I mean, this is World War II, so from that point alone, we can just go all over the place. Now, Hateful Eight was probably, I see that you wrote that down here, is probably one of the best black box films I've ever seen, big production wise.
Yeah, it's a movie that's all about tension, right? I mean, if you like it, it's also Quentin Tarantino. It's a lot, and I can't stress this enough, slower than Inglourious Basterds. It's a slow film. I mean, even the opening cinematic shot is like, 3 minutes of this one shot and nothing happens. But it is a very intense movie. Same thing with Django Unchained. That one fits a little bit closer to Inglourious Basterds in the respect of high tension, high action.
And great characters.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and Christoph Waltz is in that too. Not quite as star-studded performance as what it was in Inglourious Bastards, in my opinion, but still definitely worth watching. I mean, it's really good. Leonardo DiCaprio is just he's really creepy and crazy. Also wrote down Man in the High Castle because that is a show that's on Amazon and it's basically an alternate history show about World War II.
Yes, it is, and it's based on a book too, so you could do both if you can. Let me see if I can find the book. But tell us more about Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, it's basically just a story on if the World War II had gone the other direction, what would happen to the territories of the United States, to Japan, and how Germany would have could have done a whole bunch of different other things, and how that might have shaped the world that we live in now. It takes place, I think, it doesn't take place in modern times, right? It takes place in the 60s.
Something like that. It was the book was written in '62, and it's by Philip K. Dick, who also wrote "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," which is what Blade Runner is based off of. So if you're into that, it's a great story. Very, it's not artsy, but I think it's science fiction done at its best, but with alternate history, like you were saying. It's not weird robot rules or anything like that. It's legit alternate history. What if the Axis had won?
Yeah, exactly. And there's, yeah, read it or watch it. It's pretty interesting. And then, like Kristen said, of course, there's the whole plethora of World War II genre films and shows you can watch, like Saving Private Ryan, The Pacific, Band of Brothers, all these things if you're into more a more historical point of view. Some with fiction, right? I mean, there's a lot of fiction in that kind of stuff, but then there's also Band of Brothers, which is based on all of these true accounts of what was going on. So a lot of interesting, really good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And then I see on here, Jeff, Sin City.
Yeah, I have a feel. I mean, Sin City jumps into a whole bunch of different stories, right? And then all of the stories line up with each other at some point. So that's why I wrote Sin City down. It's probably less of the films that kind of speak to Inglourious Basterds in that style, but it has that feeling of following multiple tales that will come together in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And very strong characterizations as well. I think Sin City also does a really good job of having very strong character actors in very strong character roles. And so now we get to the final question, Jeff. Do you think this movie will hold up against the dregs of time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the films that we've talked on this show do. This one, I think, does more so than most of the films we've talked about, only because I think it is a textbook example of direction style, acting style, how audiences feel when they're watching movies, how you can control that feeling if you do it right. And I think that there's a lot that filmmakers and actors and even audiences like us, we're doing it right now, can study from this movie and get out of it. I don't think it's haphazardly put together. I think it's really well done. And then that all speaks to the amount of tension that was able to be created in this film. It's just extraordinary.
Totally. And Nexi Squishy Night in chat saying it will always be a great movie. And I have a question to ponder here. How much of that do you think is because it takes place within the confines of what a lot of people would consider to be the last great war? You know, where there was a clear enemy side and there was a clear good guy side, even though, of course, the further removed we are away, the more gray that becomes. Do you think World War II will always kind of remain that, like, golden war in people's minds?
Yeah, I think people are fascinated with World War II. I mean, if you look at all of the media that's produced, right, in comparison to World War II and World War I, World War II takes the cake without even second guessing it. Now, a lot of that probably has to do with the generation that happened, right? So World War II happened, and then when it was over, that was just when we were starting to have these different types of stories that were told in different ways, and all this stuff opened up. So that probably attributes to some of it, but people are fascinated with this topic. And there's tons of stuff about this. I mean, there have been cartoons about World War II that kind of try to make and play lighthearted at what was actually happening. And then there are cartoons that actually were drawn during the era that were, propaganda and all this stuff. I mean, there's tons of forms of media that are related to this topic. And so, yes, to answer your question in like a million sentences, I think that because of the subject matter, it will also help it stand the test of time.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, jumping off of that question, thank you for your input. What movie's coming up next, Jeff?
Next, we're taking a look at Disney Pixar's The Incredibles, the original Incredibles. You can find this movie on iTunes. You can rent it anywhere, get it home, watch it. You've probably seen it. It's one of those movies, I think, that is a real feel-good movie that was really well done, and it'll be the first animated movie that we talk about on the show.
That's a great point. It really is. And of course, it's one of those movies that does a great job balancing mature themes with kid themes, right? It's like an adult film and the guise for kids. But more on that in 2 weeks from now. If you'd like to share your thoughts and maybe be featured in the mailbag, send us your favorite part or parts about the upcoming film, The Incredibles. What do you love about it? What do you like about it? Email us at talkingpicturesalliance@gmail.com or tweet us at TPAcast. And Jeff, where can people find you when you're not here?
You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Jeff Reynolds. That's all one word on Twitter. And yeah, make sure you follow this show on Twitter, because we really want to make this a movie club that we all watch the movie together, and we want to get your thoughts. So make sure you follow us at TPAcast while you're over there.
Totally, and some great thoughts have come in. I always love to see the responses through the week, posting the trivia and stuff as we all kind of learn about these classics that were put together. As for me, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Instagram at _Kristen Ashton_. And as for the show, you can find us right here, twitch.tv/DreamDestroyer, DRMDESTRYR, every other Sunday at noon Pacific for more movie madness. We'll be back July 15th with The Incredibles. And if you'd like to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/TPAcast. Any final thoughts, Jeff?
That's a bingo!